Good morning or good afternoon to our friends in the US, Canada, Mexico, Latin America, Europe. I'm Sean Devlin from Servoy, and we have number 15 in our tech webinar series today. Thanks for joining us. We took a bit of a break a couple weeks ago, but we've been back on schedule. And today, for the first time this year, I'm happy because I don't have to do the webinar all by myself. I have a guest presenter, Duan Nguyen, who's going to help us because he's done some research and some cool examples with integrating Servoy and PhoneGap. But before we get into that, I want to remind all of you that there's a questions panel where you can ask your questions. We'll try to answer them quietly throughout the webinar, but also we'll take some time at the end to have our guest speaker answer them. So, Duan, are you ready?
Yes, thanks, Sean.
All right, take it away.
All right. So just a bit of see our agenda for today. We're going to start out with the demo of the NG client for mobile devices. And following that, we'll look at how an application like this can kind of be built using Servoy. We'll also look at how to integrate some of the hardware elements of a device, such as a camera or GPS. And we'll do a little bit of an overview of PhoneGap and some business use cases. So with that said, let's start with the demo. Okay, so for this webinar, I'm going to be presenting using an Android emulator. For those who aren't really familiar with this, it's just a tool that's going to emulate an Android device. In this case, it's going to be emulating a Google Nexus smartphone. That being said, the app that I'm going to be demoing, it can also be ran on iOS devices as well as other types of platforms. One other thing you'll notice is that I'm running Servoy Developer in the background, and that's because I'm using its built-in application server to preview this app. All right, so let's get started. Run the application. All right, and click Get Started. So as you notice, it opens just like any other mobile application. There's a couple of modules here, some examples I'm going to be previewing. You'll notice that there's some table components and some charts, and these are now mobile responsive, so they'll work well in the mobile. And now let's take a quick look at some of the other examples that take advantage of the device's native hardware. So in this case, the media files. So in this example, we're going to be using the Android OS file system or a connected camera to get some images and display them. So when I click Upload Image, I'm going to be using the built-in file system of Android. This is the default file manager, and here I've preloaded some images that we can actually click on. If I click on it, it's going to utilize that image on the app, and it's going to display it for us. Of course, you can also use the device's built-in camera to take an image. Now, since I'm using an emulator, it's not going to work, right? There's no actual camera connected to it. So, but you can try this on a real device, and it's going to actually use the camera. And you can take a picture, and you can upload it to the app as well. All right. The other example that uses native hardware is, in this case, GPS, is the location module. Since we're on an emulator, I'm going to try to set up some special, default locations that I've set up by default. So here I'm going to just click play, and as the GPS coordinates are updated and changing, you can also see that there's a visual change in the application as well. And this is using the Google Maps component to allow this. All right, so that's pretty much it for the application. There's only a couple of examples, but we're still adding more to this solution. So let's just take a quick look at the developer and how we can do this, right? So let's start by looking at the home. So you'll notice right away that this is just a regular form in Servoy using a navigation bar that can be gotten from our web packages manager. And if we go into the home page, you'll also notice that this is just a regular form. It's one of our responsive forms. Let me actually try this real quick, just to kind of prove that we're actually running locally. I'm going to try to change some text here. You can see that it actually updates it quite easily, and you'll get a live preview of sorts. So as soon as I add a little exclamation point, you'll see that the application's updated. So next we'll go over some of the examples. Here's a responsive form. Simple to do in Servoy. This responsive form has 2 rows, each with a column. And for the car-based items you see here, it's just using some CSS to get that visual look and feel. The table components, I'm using one of the default available components in Servoy. This is the high performance table module. And for the charts, we're using a chart.js library. Here you can see that there's tabs here, and here's the form. All right, so let's look at something a little bit more interesting. We talked a little bit about how to connect to the native Android file system to get some images. So how do we actually do that on Servoy? So it's simple. We use a web service that allows us to talk directly to the PhoneGap plugins. And let's take a look at how that's done. So here we have a get picture function, which is tied to one of the buttons on the image form. And we're going to call a web service here, called SVY PhoneGap Camera, and we'll call one of the functions called get picture. And here, if I'm going to be using the camera, I'll pass in some optional parameters, one of which signals that, hey, we're going to be using the camera versus the file system. There's also a callback that we can get access to. And here's the callback. If we get a picture from the file system successfully, then we're going to update our single element with some new base 64 string, and that's going to help us display the image. For our locations example, you'll notice that it's also just a basic form, has one single element that takes up the full width and height of the page, and that element is just a Google Maps component. So for this guy, I'm running a function on show called getLocation. Here I'm also calling a web service using SVY PhoneGap location. I'm going to be watching the position of the device. And this function, what it does is that it allows us to keep track of the GPS position. As the device moves or the location changes, we'll be able to call a callback function. In this case, it's going to be called getLocationSuccess. And if the position returned to us is valid, then I'm going to update my single element, the map component, with the new coordinates, latitude, longitude. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So I guess one of the questions is, how do we get access to some of these components, services? And for those who don't know already, Servoy comes with a built-in web package manager. I'm going to just preview this real quick. So all the components I showed today, the chart, the Google Maps, the table components, they're all within this right here, this view. You can just add them directly. And the PhoneGap services that allow you to take advantage of the native hardware is part of our NG services tab. So here it is, PhoneGap. Now, one thing to note is that this service is still in beta. We put an example out there, and so there's tons of plugins for PhoneGap that are available. I only previewed 2 of them, right? But of course, there's a lot more out there, and we'll discuss more about that in a little bit. But that concludes the demo portion of this. Let's go back to the presentation.
So, Duan, I have a question. Right. While you're before you get into
yes.
So in the demo, when you were getting the location, that's getting the built-in GPS from the phone.
Correct. Yes. So
and that was just a Servoy. That's just a Servoy method there. You have a fancy dark theme, so I wonder if the audience might think that that's some other IDE that has to do with Android or something. You're just writing plain Servoy code here?
Yes, exactly. Just plain Servoy code.
And you can pull you can tell the camera to take a picture and get the picture back, or you can ask it for the current GPS position at any time?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, wow.
Exactly.
Nice.
All right. Yeah, so that was just an NG client solution, obviously. It's web-based. So the one thing about PhoneGap is that this is what it allows, right? For those who don't know about Apache Cordova or Adobe PhoneGap, it's the technology that allows us to create hybrid applications, right, using web technologies. The great part about this is that it allows us access to native hardware using some of its plugins, and you can access those hardware using device APIs. This little image below here, you can kind of see how this might be done. There's a PhoneGap container, and within that container, you can wrap around an iframe of sorts, and if you already have a mobile application built, you can actually pass in the app URL, and it will load it directly on there. The great part about this is that it's also multi-platform, so you just have to build your mobile application once, and using plugins and device APIs, you can have it be accessible on different platforms like iOS, Android, Windows, etc. Okay. All right, so some of the use cases I showed, right? Being able to track location and showing information based on where a user's device is located. I think this is a great feature because if you're a traveling salesman, you might be moving to different locations, and you could have an application show you, different customers or different prospects depending on where you're located, and that could be a pretty cool use case. The other item is being able to talk to connected hardware, things like Square card reader, Bluetooth devices, keyboards, name it. You can do that if there are plugins available. And of course, being able to access the file system, uploading, downloading files directly to and from a device. And one other thing I thought was kind of cool is they also have the ability to use fingerprints or Touch ID, right, if you're using an iPhone. And I think the coolest use case about this is that it just increases the security and the convenience of an application. So you're opening an application, you might be trying to open something, a secure function, and now you don't have to enter a PIN anymore. You could just use your fingerprint, right? And you can't really do that with just a plain web application. You need some kind of API to talk to those that hardware. Yeah, and of course, there's a lot more. I just listed a few examples here, and I'm sure you can come up with some yourself as well. The service that we present today is called Servoy PhoneGap Web Service. Basically, it's just a bridge to connect Servoy to PhoneGap's native plugins. This is still in development, and so we only have a few modules right now. You can easily make your own module. It's not very hard to do. The source code for this is on GitHub, as well as the sample you saw today. So I'm actually going to open up that link and just kind of show you what it looks like if you were to go to our GitHub site, right? Let's take a look at that, see what you get access to. Here's the mobile sample, and you'll notice there's a wiki. You can actually get information on how to build your own version of this, or just help you get started with building your own mobile application. It has all the information on how to set it up using a Servoy developer and PhoneGap. The other thing is that that's why PhoneGap is also available on GitHub. And here we also have a lot of documentation for it. Like I said, there's only 3 modules right now. There's a little getting started guide, how to set it up, and all the APIs and information on how to call these functions are also available here. Lastly, the demo I presented today is actually available on the Play Store as well. So if you're lazy and you don't want to build it right away, and you have an Android device, you can actually go to this link below and try downloading it directly to your phone and play around with it. Yeah, so that pretty much concludes my presentation.
Okay.
Any questions, John?
Yeah, we have a few questions coming in. One person asks, is this a different client type? Is this a new kind of client?
No, it is not. Let me show you what I'm actually doing. So this is the regular Servoy developer. And if I run it here, see if I can. You'll notice that it's just a regular NG client, localhost, and I've designed it so that it works well on mobile devices. Well, it won't look well on the desktop, obviously. Look a little funky, but if you're using it in a mobile view, it'll look okay. So this is a web app, right? That I've kind of wrapped around PhoneGap, underneath PhoneGap. And however, none of the hardware features are going to work. So if I were to try and squeeze a little bit, try and upload an image, it won't work, right? Because there's no camera for the web. But using PhoneGap, you can get access to those hardware. So yeah, this is just a regular Servoy application, NG client.
Okay. We have another question that says, is the app server running on the phone? What about resources? Data broadcast?
We get all of that. It's running locally right now. Servoy developer comes with a built-in application server, so data broadcasting, resources, all that is handled by Servoy developer. It's not even, the application doesn't do any of that.
But what about the deployed application? So the one that you put in the App Store, is that also, I think the question is that installing also somehow the app server on the phone, and does that then mean you have to have?
The app server is deployed in a separate location. It's a separate server. So okay. You'll deploy it just like any other NG client application.
Okay, so it's still a pure like web application when you deploy it, or it talks the same way to the server as the NG client.
Exactly.
Okay. Did you have to write any Android/iOS?
That's the great part about this. I do not have to write any of that. No Objective-C, no Java, just regular old Servoy functions and forms.
Okay, that's good to know. And well, some of these you already answered. And we have some other comments that just say really cool app.
Oh, all right, thanks.
Okay, yeah, well, if you have any more questions, you can go to the forum where we keep a running thread, and also some of the links that Duan shared, including where all the wiki documentation is on those GitHub projects. And if you want to re-watch this webinar because you found it so inspiring, you can go to the Tech Series homepage. If you want to bring up your slide with the useful links, Duan, we could just post those one last time as we close out the webinar here. Yeah, so those are the places where you can find more info about this and other webinars. Okay, well, thanks very much to my guest speaker. It was a nice break for me to be on the other side and to listen and ask questions. Really cool stuff. And stay tuned. We do this every 2 weeks. We don't have an announcement yet for 2 weeks from now, but there will be a webinar, and it will be informative and fun and cool. So thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your week.
All right, thanks, everybody.